Welcome. This is the first video in our course on teams. So in this video, we need to define our basic term and answer the question, what is a team? There are a lot of definitions of a team, so I'll start by sharing mine. A team is a small number of people who collaborate to achieve a shared goal. The keys to this definition are three things. Firstly, a small number of people. Secondly, collaboration. And third, the shared goal. Let's look at them one at a time. We'll start with a small number of people. What do we mean by small? Well, I guess it's like a piece of string. There's no answer to the question how long it is, but I think we can get an intuitive grasp by looking at the kind of teams we're familiar with. Sports teams, service teams, organisational teams. They typically run up from anything like 2, 3 or 4 people to perhaps a maximum of around about 20. The smallest teams are probably teams of 3 or 4. In sport, there are lots of examples of teams of 4, and the same is true in military units, that the smallest common team is a team of 4, the fire team in many different special operations units. At the top end, we see sports teams of 13, 14, 15, and even in American football, with which I'm not very familiar, the field team is not huge, even if the whole team is a very large team. Even in politics, if we look at cabinet government and the executive of a lot of democratic states, we find that once you get close to 20, we reach a limit. So a small number of people is typically anything from 4 to 20 people. The next term to look at is collaboration, and this is all about the group of people working together in a way that is interdependent. If I can assign a task to the first person, another task to the second, and a third task to another person, and they can go off and do those tasks on their own, they're not a team. But as soon as they have to collaborate and work together, that brings them into a more of a team structure. And finally, there's the idea of a shared goal. If the team shares an aspiration or a goal or a set of objectives, then it needs to share that commitment to achieving them. And that also means that the team members need to hold one another accountable for their contributions towards that shared goal. Therefore, if you take a small number of people, you ask them to achieve something together to which they are all committed and which requires cooperation and collaboration and interdependent working, then you will forge a team. Now we've defined what a team is, we also need to answer the question, how does a team differ from a group? Because in some of the videos in this course, we're going to look at how you take a group of people and move them towards being a team. I'm going to pick on 5 characteristics which I think particularly distinguish a team from a group. There are plenty of others, and in the exercise below, I'd like you to think about what other characteristics you think are relevant in distinguishing a group from a team. The first thing is that team members often have complementary skill sets, experiences that differ, so that when the team comes together, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The buzzword that you'll often hear for this is synergy. Synergy is when we bring people or parts together and what we get is greater than the sum of those parts individually. And this comes about through the collaboration of people with different experiences, skills, capabilities to contribute. The second characteristic that distinguishes a team from a group is the degree of mutual support. Team members will help one another through the difficult times and they will provide care and collaboration and a supportive environment for one another. But the price of this, of course, is that they will also hold one another accountable for their contributions to the team and therefore the work that they do to take the team towards achieving its goal. My third distinguishing characteristic is what psychologists call norms of behaviour. A group has no internal unwritten rules except those it gets from outside the group. But as the group develops into a team, it develops its own norms of behaviour. Standards that team members expect of one another. These can relate to all sorts of things, from the way we support one another, the way we question one another, our communication styles, our habits and our rituals. Teams develop these unwritten implicit rules, and by and large team members follow those rules without ever questioning them or feeling that they are inappropriate because they come about from a consensus within the team. Fourth, and this isn't always true, but by and large groups need conspicuous leadership. They need someone to stand at the front of the group and tell it what it needs to do and how it needs to do it. Teams are far less reliant on overt leadership. What this means is that individuals within the team can take leadership roles as the team's agenda migrates from one thing to another. Different people will step up and take the lead. It is quite possible, particularly for a small team, for there not to be a designated leader, but for the team to collaborate so well that it doesn't need that leadership. Clearly, as a team gets larger, it does help to have someone appointed to arbitrate and to provide direction and support and guidance. But fundamentally, a group must have a leader. A team doesn't necessarily need one. And finally, I'd like to emphasize the role of trust. A group of people may or may not trust one another, and the trust they may have may be deep, but is more likely to be shallow. Whereas a team will trust one another, and the level of that trust will deepen with time to a point where people can feel reliant upon their collaborators without feeling concerned that they will be let down. In the description below, I'll provide a link to a simple diagnostic tool you can use to assess the extent to which your team is really a team or simply a group of people who happen to be working in the same place at the same time. In the first section of this course, we'll spend a lot of time looking at how a group evolves to become a team, and in particular, what you as the team leader can do to accelerate and support that process. We'll look at a number of models, and we will understand what has to happen at the different stages. But for now, know that a team is a small group of people who collaborate with one another to achieve a shared goal. Perhaps the best known and most widely used model for how groups develop into a team is that developed by Bruce Tuckman, the Tuckman model. So in this video, I'm going to explain how the Tuckman model works. The Tuckman model was developed in the 1960s by Bruce Tuckman and then further refined in collaboration with Mary Ann Jensen in the 1970s. It's a hugely influential model and, by all accounts, my favourite model of team development. Tuckman said that the success of the model was almost certainly due to the fact that they chose rhyming words for the different stages of the model, which made it easy for people to remember. And whilst I think there is definitely something in that, I would also say that the Tuckman model is almost the perfect model in that it strikes the ideal balance between simplicity and sophistication. It is simple enough that we can easily understand it and memorize it. There aren't huge numbers of stages and components that make it complex to understand. But on the other hand, there is enough in it that it carries the sort of sophistication and subtlety that we need to explain a broad range of experiences and to accurately predict what will happen in many cases. Model building is difficult. Getting that balance between simplicity and sophistication is hard. But Tuckman has hit the nail on the head. So let's have a look at Tuckman's model, which some people call the Orming model. And you'll know why when you hear the names of the stages. And that first stage is the forming stage. The forming stage is when the team first comes together. At that stage, they are not a team. They're just a group of people who don't know one another or who may know one another a bit. So at this early stage, what people will do is try to get to know one another. They will ask each other simple questions. Their conversation will be at a superficial level. What they're trying to do is to get some measure of each other and to get a sense of where they have things in common. What the team will really want to do is to get on with some work. So your job in leading the team is to keep them active, and in doing the work, they will start to get to know one another. But of course, once people start to get to know one another, personalities will start to emerge. At the early stages, we're kind of suppressing elements of our personality because we want to see how it fits in with other people. But as we feel more confident, our desire to fit in is exceeded by our desire to be true to ourselves. Some people, of course, will push for a dominant role within the group. They will try to assert themselves. Others will be less confident, less assertive, and will be looking for a niche. They'll be looking for allies with whom they can get on, and also roles that they can feel comfortable in. You will find that this is the stage where people start to argue. They will argue with the tasks they are set, they will argue with the leadership they receive, and they will argue with one another. This is the stage that Tuckman called the storming stage. It is intensely psychological. The team has moved from a very low level of confidence to enough confidence to assert itself. And yet still they are not completely comfortable with the work that they need to do. But this intensely psychological, emotional stage is draining on people, and eventually they will settle down. People will start to feel that they've got a place in the group. And once they feel they've got a place in the group, they can retreat into getting their work done. So the next stage, which Tuckman called the norming stage, can be highly productive. What we tend to find in the norming stage is people settling down and getting on with their work. In the background, people are also trying to find ways of working with one another. The team will move towards a consensus of the kind of behaviours that work for it. And this is what psychologists call norming. They are finding norms of behaviour, patterns of working which work for the team. If your leadership is effective, then you can move the team on from the norming stage to the final stage of Tuckman's original model, and that's the performing stage. If people have found good ways to work with one another and they have started to build good relationships, then they can start to help one another. They can provide creative input, support in problem solving, guidance, support with difficulties as well. And that means the team will work as one. They will start to collaborate. They will be working on their shared goal together. And now the level of performance of the team will take a jump. If you've ever worked in a team where it has been a joy to be part of that team, even though the other members of the team may not be your best friends, you felt that you were achieving great things together. This is a team in the performing stage. It has achieved a high level of performance. And in Tuckman's original work, this was the end of the story. But in the 70s, working with Mary Ann Jensen, they re-examined the model. They confirmed that the forming, storming, norming and performing stages were still consistent with all the most current research, but they also identified that there was another stage. Because a team that has worked well together and performed well together and formed productive workplace social bonds that is then split up to go its separate ways will find that disruptive. They called this next stage the adjourning stage. The team adjourns. But many people, like myself, prefer the term mourning, because although it would be crass to think that a team splitting up is rather like a personal loss and a bereavement, the centres in our brain that cope with it are the same ones. They just cope with it at a lower level of intensity. And therefore, the right thing for the team to do when it splits up is to do the sort of things we do when we are mourning the loss of a loved one. We need to acknowledge that something valuable is being lost and celebrate what we had. If the team does not mourn, then the individuals may not comfortably move on to their next team role. Now, in the 1990s, I worked on a lot of teams on a lot of projects in different organisations. And I saw the Tuckman model play out. I saw the forming, storming, norming, performing and mourning stages all play out in my experience. However, I also observed that something else happened sometimes. The team would be working well. It would be in the performing stage. Then one or two people would leave. New people would come in. Or maybe the same team would be retasked from this job to another job. And strangely, this high-performing team stopped performing as well, at least for a while. I refer to this as the transforming stage, and it reminds us that we need to remember that when people from the team leave, when new people join the team, when the team has different work to do, it changes enough that the team may no longer be in the performing stage. It may slip back to a norming stage, finding new ways of working with the new people in the team, or new ways of working together on the new task. If it's a big enough change, there may be arguments about the new roles that people have on the new task, or filling gaps for people who have left. And those arguments can feel a lot like the storming stage. If the change is huge, then people won't really be sure where they sit within the team and what it's all about, and it might even feel like the forming stage all over again. So that's the basic Tuckman model. I wonder if you recognise it from your own experiences, because I certainly do from mine. We'll develop our thinking about this more as we go through the next modules in this course. But for now, the important thing to remember is that a team will storm. It will go through the forming, storming, norming and performing stages if led well. But even if it jumps straight from coming together to performing well under pressure to perform, after a while, the team will storm. When the pressure comes off, personalities will out and people will start to argue. So don't necessarily think that the cycle of forming, storming, norming and performing is a rigid one. The Tuckman model is a hugely flexible model, and it's one that I believe every manager should know, should understand, and be able to call to mind when they are working with a group that needs to develop into a team. Norms are generally accepted patterns and standards of behaviour within a group or a team. And in this video, I want to explore more about norms and how to develop them for your team. Norms often take the form of unstated, implicit rules for team members. And breaking those norms often incurs displeasure from team members, or even social sanctions. Given that nobody likes rules, what then is the value of having norms within your team? Well, firstly, there's efficiency. If team members know how to react to certain situations, how to work with their colleagues, how to collaborate, how to get on, what sort of things to say and when to say them, then they can focus more on the work they need to do and the creativity and problem solving of the task at hand. If the group hasn't yet formed into a team, then there are no norms of behaviour, and therefore every time we need to interact, we potentially have to think through the best way to do it. And that can be distracting, it can sap our energy, and it can remove focus from the task at hand. A second value of norms is group identity. The team shares a set of norms, and therefore it feels like a coherent group, and it can separate itself from other groups and other teams that may have slightly different sets of norms of behaviour. But even if the team next door has exactly the same norms of behaviour, because we have settled on our norms, we feel they belong to us, and therefore we feel like a group working together. And thirdly, our team's norms of behaviour help to define our team in relationship to the wider organisation. It sets the rules by which we interact with other groups, with other teams, and with the structures around us. This means we not only share a sense of identity, but we feel safe in representing the team and the work that the team is doing to the outside world, because we know what we have to do and how we have to do it to conform to our norms of behaviour. So where do norms come from? How do we form these norms of behaviour? Well, there are two principal ways, and the first and most common is called convergence. The group converges on a set of norms as it forms itself into a team. Often, the norms that the team will adopt are something like the average of the kinds of behaviours that team members have experienced and felt comfortable with in the past. However, they can be toxic because sometimes team members bring norms of behaviour that they've experienced and not necessarily felt comfortable with, but haven't internally challenged and tested. And the problem with these norms of behaviour is that they tend to be sticky. Norms can be very resistant to change because they come about through a melding together of individuals to make a team. It's therefore crucial that you get the norms right at the start. So the second way that norms can come about is through leadership. If you are a team leader, you have a vital role in guiding and crafting the set of norms that the team adopt. And I don't say you should completely override the set of norms that the team is converging on and feels comfortable with, but you must look out for toxic behaviours. You must also think about the kinds of behaviours you want to encourage. And there are two principal ways that you can do this, that you can lead the team towards a healthy and productive and respectful set of norms of behaviour. The first of these is by modelling the behaviours you want to see. If you want to see people showing gratitude for contributions and acting in a polite and courteous manner to one another, then you need to acknowledge and thank people for their contributions and be polite and courteous to the team members. The second way that you can lead the development of norms is by setting expectations, stating your expectations for how you want people to behave, and recognising, acknowledging and praising contributions that meet those norms. If you reinforce behaviours that you consider are productive and conform to the kind of norms that you'd like to see the team develop, and you pick people up on behaviours that you think are toxic and do not correspond to the kind of norms you want, then you will gradually shift the balance. By and large, if convergence brings together a set of norms, that is the average of the different norms the team members bring to the group, it's also true that that average tends to be a weighted average. All team members are not equal in their contribution to this convergence process. And if people look up to you as the leader, then the weight of your expectations and of your behaviours will be greater than other people's and will move the needle towards the kind of behaviours that you are demonstrating yourself and those that you set expectations for and recognise and reward. So what is it that norms cover? Well, they cover just about everything. So let's have a look at some examples. Norms can cover roles, what people do and how they contribute to the team. They can cover performance expectations, how we make and meet commitments, and timeliness, how we ask for help, and how we offer and give feedback to one another. They can cover altruism and cooperation and reciprocity, the give and take that makes a team a pleasure to be a part of. They can cover care and support for one another and how the team resolves conflict among its members. They can cover standards of courtesy and how those integrate with wider social standards and the different cultural expectations of team members. And of course, they can cover the standards of respectful behaviour that you expect within the team. And we can contrast that with disrespectful behaviour, which can become a norm of behaviour in a toxic environment. And finally, norms can cover social activities, everything from making coffee to going out as a group after work. The development of respectful and productive norms of behaviour is an important part of the transition as a team moves from the storming phase through the norming phase to the performing phase. Without productive and helpful norms, the team cannot reach that high performance stage. So, when you have a team that is entering the norming stage, think about your role in guiding the norms of behaviour that you want to see. Teams are a good thing, and no one doubts it. So, surely team building is a good thing too. Well, the team building industry is a huge multi-million dollar, multi-million euro, multi-million pound, multi-million yen, multi-million rupee industry. And often team building events go horribly wrong. So in this video, I want to ask and answer 3 important questions. First, what is team building? Second, why is it important? And thirdly, what do you need to know to create a good team building event? Let's start with asking, what is team building? Team building is a team event or activity that is deliberately designed to increase team cohesion or team performance. Importantly, team building is not about the practical, functional, technical process skills that a team carries out. That's the role of team training. But equally important is to note that some of the very best team building events are training events. If team training is well designed, it's respectful to the team and trains them in things that are valuable and they work together collaboratively to learn, then that can have a huge impact on team building as well. So don't rule out the value of team training as a way of team building. However, team building is primarily about the social and cohesion aspects of teams, how they work together. Therefore, it's great for resolving breakdowns in relationships, for fixing conflict, and for finding better ways of doing things. And that takes us towards the second question. Why is team building important? If you've got a team, then it makes sense to invest in that team's effectiveness. And the primary way we do that is through day-to-day leadership. But sometimes there isn't enough time and there isn't enough scope for a leader to develop their team sufficiently during the day-to-day. You need to take the team out of their day-to-day environment for a team-building event. And team-building interventions tend to have one of two purposes. The first is remedial. The team-building event is primarily there to fix a problem. It may be a communication problem, it may be a trust problem, it may be a conflict, or a physical problem that the team needs to work on together to solve. The alternative is developmental team-building activities. These are there to help the team to move from an acceptable level of performance to an even higher level of performance. To give you an example of some of the specific things that we design team-building events to fix, let me give you a short list. Alignment around team objectives, clarity of roles and work allocation, improving collaborative behaviours or increasing trust and confidence, strengthening relationships and group cohesion, resolving conflicts or long-term reducing conflicts within the team, appreciating individuals' contributions, their strengths, their values and their styles, solving specific problems, applying critical thinking to problems or decisions, strengthening processes like decision making, finding better ways for the team to communicate amongst itself, improving team morale and individual motivation, and enhancing individuals' commitment to the team as a whole. If you've seen our video on the Tuckman model, you'll know how valuable it is as a way to understand how a team moves from a group of individuals to a coherent team. And we can also use the Tuckman model to investigate the different types of team building intervention we might design at the different stages of a group's development. So let's use the 5 stages of the Tuckman model as a way to understand the different types of team building activity. And we'll start with the forming stage, when the team comes together. And the most obvious team building activity to undertake during the forming stage is to help team members to learn about each other, to get to know one another. Great activities for this team building event are focused around sharing experiences, sharing our skills and our backgrounds and our aspirations for the team. The other thing that we often do during the forming stage in team building events is working on making sure that everyone in the team fully understands and shares a commitment to the team's goals and objectives. A knock-on benefit to team building at this stage should be to enhance your position as a leader. You can use the team building event to help the team get used to you, to understand your style, your personality, and to build their confidence in you. The storming stage is the most uncomfortable stage of a team's development, and this is where personalities clash. So your team building event is most likely to focus on the emotional and psychological aspects of the team rather than the functional and task-based aspects. Indeed, it may well be focused purely on resolving conflict, and the most likely source of conflict is role allocations. So use your team building event to allow people to share their aspirations for roles, what they're good at, what they want to do, and to develop a team role allocation together. You may also need to use a team building event at this stage to assert your leadership. There will be some highly assertive members of your group who want to influence or even control decision making. If this isn't appropriate, you need to use the team building event to show that you are confident in your leadership and to build an alliance with the group as a whole. Since the storming stage is largely about conflict, another hugely valuable approach to team building in the storming stage is to channel that conflict in a creative direction. And the way to do this is creative problem solving. A well-facilitated problem-solving session will allow people to express their conflict in a positive way, to argue and debate about possible solutions. And as long as you construct the session well and facilitate it appropriately, you can avoid the less confident, less assertive members getting pushed to one side and allow all voices to be heard properly. At this stage, you can use that creative tension to find great solutions to the long-term problems that you're going to be facing together as a team. And finally, one way to overcome conflict and to overcome people's uncertainties with one another is to celebrate successes. Use your team building event to celebrate the successes you've had so far and to generate new successes that you can celebrate as a team. In the norming stage, your team is already starting to work well, but not necessarily work well together. This stage is about building and strengthening a culture and a set of practices, so use your team building event to do just that. Use it to help the team come together and determine the best ways of working together. But the other aspect of the norming stage is this is where people start to form productive workplace relationships. So whatever you do in your team building event, leave plenty of informal time for people to socialize and get to know one another better. Because this is what will create that network of connections that will allow people to exercise those social norms for creative collaboration. In the performing stage, your team is already working well together. So why do you need a team building event? Well, it comes back to fixing the small problems that the teams may be having, or to enhancing its performance further. Skills building and knowledge enhancing activities like learning together and working together to optimize processes are the sort of things you should be doing. Indeed, if you can get the team to teach one another or to work together collaboratively to find better solutions to the activities that it already does, you do two things. One is you lift the level of the team, but secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, you give them experience of working together to manage themselves. Take a step back. Let the team lead itself, because in a high-performing team, it won't always be obvious to the external observer who is in charge, because different team members will be stepping forward to take a leadership role. If you can give the team the opportunity to grow its confidence in self-management and self-leadership, then that's the real way to enhance the performance of a team in the performing stage. And finally, for a team in the adjourning or mourning stage, team building itself isn't appropriate because the team is going its separate ways. But what you do need to do is to get the team together to reflect on everything it's achieved and to celebrate the successes it's had. Because we need to recognize the value of working together as a team. And we need to acknowledge the fact that we are moving on. So your team event needs to do both of those things. It's a scaled down version of the mourning process we find in just about every human culture around the world. So, if you're going to do a team building event, the final question is, what do you need to know to do it well? I'm going to answer that question in two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about the different stages around the team building event. And secondly, I'm going to give you 3 important cautions that you need to be mindful of. Team building events are often a huge investment, not just in terms of resources and budget, but in terms of the time of the team. You're taking them out of their workplace environment where they are productive and taking them into a new environment. And if the team building event is not productive, then you're wasting that time. And indeed, since you've already invested huge amounts in the team up to now, if the team building event sets the team back, then you are wasting that prior investment too. The first thing you have to do is be absolutely clear about what your objectives are for your team building event. And that means narrowing down all the things you could achieve to a small number, ideally 1 or possibly 2, primary objectives that you're going to focus on. If you spread your efforts in team building around a load of objectives, we want to achieve this and that and this and that and that and this and this and that, chances are you won't achieve any of them. If you're very clear what the 1 or 2 things you need to achieve are, then you can design appropriately. And that brings us to the second stage, designing your team building event carefully to hit your objectives. I'm not going to talk about how to design a team building event because that's a very specialist topic, but what I will say is that in designing it, whether you're working individually or with experts or with your team, you need to be mindful of the constraints. Yes, there are constraints on budget and resources and time, but there are also cultural constraints around the team itself and the values it holds and the preferences of the individuals. Bring those into your design to make sure you get an event that works well for everyone, and I'll say more about that a little later. And finally, the thing that people forget is the importance and the value of the debrief process at the end of any team activity. You need a well-facilitated process to make sure the team understands what it's learned from that activity and how it can apply that learning into the workplace. Now, sometimes your intention will be that they learn from the activity and then it sinks in at the unconscious level and manifests itself in the workplace without consciously discussing it. But a period of reflection is essential. And equally, a period of reflection is essential after the team building event itself. Not only do you need to reflect on how successful it was and what you did well and what you need to learn from it, but it is worth revisiting the team building event with the team after the event to see how it's settling in and what you need to do to further capitalize on the investment you've made. So what are the cautions I would offer? Well, the first is I caution against the possibility of team rebellion. People love team building events by and large, but if there is an activity they don't like and they don't understand why it's there and how it contributes, or even if there is an activity that they enjoy but they can't see how it applies in any way to their real work, they may resent its presence. Why are we wasting time? Why are we wasting money on doing this? I don't see the point. Now, rebellion can destroy a team, but even worse than that, it can strengthen a team's cohesion in opposition to you, the team leader. It's fine to do activities where people don't understand why they're doing that activity at the outset. But if it does not become clear to them at some suitable point why that activity is relevant and what its value is to them as a team, then you will get rebellion. The second caution is around accessibility, and this also links into rebellion. Because the team activities that you choose, the whole event needs to be fully accessible to every team member. You need to be very mindful of their personal preferences, of their cultural or religious or traditional preferences, and of their physical or mental abilities. Every team member needs to be able to participate fully to their own satisfaction in the activity. If it's in any way discriminatory, then again, people will rebel against it. It's fine to take people out of their comfort zone and to stretch them. But if you put them in their discomfort zone and leave them there for too long, then they will rebel. The final caution is around your duty of care to your team members. You have to think about health and safety. You have to look after your people and make sure that any events you run are run by people who are properly skilled, properly qualified to run them, and that the activities have been properly tested and that you have thought about the health and safety. You've done all of the proper checks that are legally required in your jurisdiction and are morally required by your organisation and your people. And you need to have contingency plans in case you can't do the things you want to do. Think about the weather, for example. Take care of your people. Do things that they understand, that they can participate in fully, and make sure that the activities in your team building event are well targeted to achieve the objectives that you have. If you do all of that, your team building events can be a magnificent way to fix team problems or enhance team performance. Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. There'll be loads more great management courses content to come, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of it. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, keep learning.